Uh, Good evening, everybody. On behalf of all the members of SKI, I welcome you to the fourth roundtable SKI webinar, which is a case-based discussion. Today's topic, what we have is early OA knee management. All of us know that knee replacement is the gold standard for any arthroplasty surgeon, but this seminar will bring out everything except knee replacement in the management of OA. So, most of the time we have arthroplasty meetings, we do discuss knee replacement for 2 days together. But this one, Vijay has put together early OA knee management, which includes non-surgical options and surgical options like osteotomy and others. So Vijay is today's speaker and the moderator, and we have host of panelists today. We have Raju, Vishwaran, Jacob, Sachin, we have Alankar, we have Bhushan, Sharan Patil. We also have Kanchan Bhattacharya for the first time from Calcutta. We have Adarsh Reddy, we have Mukesh, Clement, and Vikas. So over to you, Vijay. So we'll start this.
Thanks very much, Parag. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to do some learning in these tough times, really. So this presentation, I'd like to say we work as a team. So that's myself doing arthroplasty work, Dr. Clement Joseph, the team would do arthroscopy and sports medicine, and Kumar would do deformity correction. Yeah, some of the cases, we do combined work. Yeah. So I think this is the most apt topic for SKI, or the Society of Knee Surgeons of India, because as we all know, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in 2020, we have only a hammer. Like if we just do TKRs, or if we just do unis or H2Os, then you're not able to address the entire spectrum. And I think a lot of units are falling short in that because they don't have the repertoire of offering all that is available today in 2020. So today we need much more instruments than just a hammer to manage knee OA, I think. And of course, many of you may not know, but the common classification that we use, the Kellgren-Lawrence, is described in 1957. So nearly 60, 70 years of the classification use the same. Probably it's time for a new one, but nevertheless, we'll be using the same in this today's discussion as well. But what has changed in 2020 is that our understanding of the pathophysiology of OA, we now understand much more than what we used to a few years ago. And our rheumatology colleagues tell us that it's actually an inflammatory disease, and we must actually call it as osteoarthrosis and not osteoarthritis. So fascinating things about pathophysiology we are now beginning to understand about OA, and thereby the management also changes. So what is even more fascinating is that the OA now is believed to be a driver of other chronic diseases, just like, the microbiome of these an interest that's driving chronic diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's, etc. Low-grade OA may also be a driver of many of the chronic conditions. Again, it's fascinating. So what really boils down to it today is that how we look at OA differently is that we now are able to recognize different phenotypes. Yeah. So you have the age-related one that's been there all while, but now we have a cartilage phenotype, a metabolic phenotype, a synovitis-driven inflammatory phenotype, etc. And therefore, we find that probably our management is also tailored. So my question to the panel would be: you try and differentiate the different phenotypes today, or you put all in the same basket? Any other panel who has anything can take it on. Yeah. Jacob?
Yeah. I think
you want to differentiate, or you want to sort of put everything in the same basket?
I think definitely inflammatory and non-inflammatory you want to change.
Yeah.
You know that any arthritis is going to make it inflammatory because the degradation products is going to cause further issues. So you want to stop that primary inflammatory pathway to damage the rest of it. So you want to probably block even the primary arthritic patients from further damage.
So you mean the synovitis driven? So what do you do for them?
I have to look in terms of some biologics if I can't find a cause, or use disease modifying drugs.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, or you would refer them to a rheumatologist, yeah. Maybe it's not in our thing. So certainly we got to recognize these subtypes now more and more. And the other one, of course, the metabolic type, which is, I think we have to recognize as synovitis driven, or the inflammatory type is important to recognize. The metabolic today is also important to recognize. Typically, a patient comes with, back pain, knee pain, ankle pain, all pain. And just because they have knee pain, they get a TKR, and they end up far worse than they are. I'm sure you all agree with that. Yeah. So they are the metabolic type, but probably TKR is not the option. Yeah. So we still don't have any definite test to identify which particular phenotype is it. Although there are a lot of works going on in future, we may have more objective tests to find out what they are. So in 2020, to conclude, OA is a disease process and not a condition, and it's a continuum in evolution, and we need to tailor treatment depending on which stage you see the patient and what type of phenotype it is. So we need horses for courses, and you can't be a one-trick pony today in 2020. A few years ago, probably a one-trick pony would have sufficed, but not now. So this is my first patient. She's 58 years old. She has left knee pain for 4 months, describes anterior and medial joint pain, severe pain on walking, and some wrist pain, full range of movement. She's 85 kilos, no comorbidities, has seen the local GP, and this is the first ortho consult. She just comes to see you the first time. Kanchan, you want to take that? Those are the X-rays.
So this is the first time, and
Yes.
X-rays don't look too bad. She's a little overweight.
Yeah.
I would keep on conservative management, activity management, weight reduction, strengthening of the muscles, and first of all, what you just mentioned, exclude any inflammatory or metabolic causes. Taking that those are not there, I will keep her on this conservative body management, and in today's context, I have a closer look at her vitamin D and calcium content as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for the junior colleagues, exactly what Kanchan said. But surprisingly, this patient was offered TKR in 4 different hospitals actually before she came to see me. So big no-no for any kind of arthroplasty or any surgery, first time, and you have to manage them conservatively. No question about that. Yeah. So we'll take each one a little more. So what about exercise and physio? Does anyone have a strong opinion about it? It works, it doesn't work?
So I will always advise exercise and physiotherapy. It definitely works. There is a lot of evidence to show that it does help, especially in Kellgren-Lawrence 1 and 2. It has a definitive role, and we should always send them for physiotherapy. The question is, which kind of physical therapy is going to work? What modalities are going to work? That is something which we need to really see and discuss with our physiotherapists.
Yeah, so probably one thing that doesn't work is this interventional therapy and ultrasonic treatment and all that.
Right.
They're probably a thing. But what really does work is a good exercise program. Yeah. So we have put together in our unit a knee school, and the patients seem to be doing extremely well. Just giving them a leaflet with the exercises to do and sending them off is certainly not the full. Sometimes, it's more difficult to manage them conservatively than operating on them. So the exercise program has to be customized, it has to be modular, and you must document improvement. You must have some objective measure by which you show the patient that they're really improving. Like any other, any other program like CultFit or something that you're going to, you need to have more objective parameters. And there must be an active patient involvement, and they do very well. Group sessions are found to be extremely useful with that. Yeah. So evidence-based AOS recommendation, the one modality that's extremely useful in early OA is exercise program. A lot of us do sort of ignore that or not give full effort to that. Yeah. So I think for junior colleagues, you must really give your time for this one. They've got the strongest evidence of all the modalities that we have that works very well.
Absolutely.
And also helps the flexibility, which itself is a big advantage.
Absolutely.
Physiotherapy
Absolutely,
and exercise.
Yeah. So Sharon, what about weight loss?
I mean, it's a difficult thing to say whether it will work completely, but it's always good to work on the toning of the muscles. The people who are heavier tend to have less activity, and people who are slimmer will have more activity. It balances out in many ways. But I've not found it so easy for making people to lose weight either. So definitely an advice I would give, but how effective it is, how measurable it is questionable.
Anyone has got strong opinions either way? Yes, Alanka. Yeah.
So all my patients who don't want to operate, I think they are not fit for surgery, especially young ladies. I give them no options. I tell them you have to lose weight. They go to a endocrinologist, and I also tell them that you will have to go to a bariatric surgeon. So there is evidence which says that for any symptomatic benefit out of weight loss, they have to have at least 10% weight loss of their body weight.
Yeah, the commonly held opinion is they cannot lose weight. That's true in end-stage arthritis, but where they cannot walk. But in early arthritis, they can all do exercise very nicely. So when you're talking about early OA, unlike late OA, walking, for example, a lot of GPs especially advise against walking, some orthopedicians as well. But now it's proven beyond doubt that low impact aerobic activity like walking immensely beneficial in many, many ways. And diet intervention, of course, many beneficial, especially the metabolic type, etc. So early OA, I think, is a key to work on weight loss. We will not ignore that fact. Unlike late OA, where your weight loss may not work because they just can't exercise it. They just cannot exercise. It's so painful. Whereas here you find that when they exercise, the pain actually goes down. It's a good parameter for you to know whether you are dealing with early OA or late OA. Recommendation has been moderate from the AOS. What about NSAIDs? Raju?
Yeah, so my first choice of pain relief pill would be paracetamol, 1000 milligram paracetamol, or a combination of paracetamol and tramadol. And just to add to your weight loss, the last comment that you made, it's perhaps got to do more with eating than with exercise. And I mean, exercise, it's published research in several platforms like the British Journal of Sports Medicine, etc. It just makes you live longer and healthier. But if your primary intention is to lose weight, you must get in touch with a good dietitian. And this I can possibly even tell from my own personal example. I was more than 100 kilograms 3 years ago and couldn't manage to lose anything by just going to the gym and exercising. But when I consulted a dietitian, the weight started to drop precipitously. So perhaps even end-stage arthritic people who can't possibly exercise in a pain-free manner. And I would like to recommend aquatic exercise for them. Unfortunately, in Delhi, for 6 months, the swimming pools are closed, but you live in Chennai, swimming pools are open throughout the year. And maybe those who can't swim, they can probably walk in water.
They moved on to NSAIDs.
Correct.
And NSAIDs, naproxen would be my choice. Yes, 500 milligrams or 250 milligrams, depending on patient weight.
Anybody in the panel thinks we must not use NSAIDs?
No. I feel we should always use NSAIDs because as the first line of treatment, they do help. But what I would not use is opioids. Sometimes, people use narcotics and that is something which we should avoid. Drugs like diclofenac, naproxen, ketorolac, paracetamol, I would use them.
And our medical colleagues warn us against renal toxicity and liver toxicity, etc. But used on a SOS basis, it's extremely helpful. And I think we must not miss this step. A lot of people give a course of 1 week. That's no good. Must have a long-term program used on a SOS basis. And I think it's extremely useful. And the recommendation for this is very strong. Evidence is very strong. That is very, very helpful. Yeah. So please do not skip this step.
So what are the various options you have of NSAIDs apart from naproxen and paracetamol? What do you use, Vijay?
Rule about NSAIDs is that one patient may say naproxen works like magic. The next patient will say it's completely useless. Yeah. So you got to tailor it to the patient. And some of them are tolerant of something. The next patient is not tolerant. So it's very patient dependent. You got to experiment and find out. But once you find something out, stick to that long-term basis, SOS basis. Don't use too much. Don't overdose. An excellent modality to handle. Yeah. So we move on to supplements and nutraceuticals. So we have 3 types. We have the glucosamine, chondroitin, and MSM. We have turmeric or curcumin, and then we have the collagen peptides. So Clement, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely the ESCA sports medicine recommendation, the turmeric is featured. And also for sports cartilage injuries, there is a beneficial effect of what is Boswellia. But I'm not sure I would recommend collagen powders, even though they are marketed left and right by the pharma industries. And glucosamine chondroitin sulfate, I will stop using for advanced OAs. Maybe for a placebo effect, I may give just to make the patient feel better.
No, this was this is the patient who we talked about now. So,
yeah.
Patient who had X-rays you have seen.
Okay.
We're not talking about advanced OA. This is the patient profile we are seeing, and this is what you're advising. Yeah. So you'd use curcumin, yeah. So anybody any strong opinions for or against?
I don't use any of these.
I don't. Same here. don't use any of them, which I have not had any conclusive evidence it works.
Yeah,
So,
certainly. So the evidence most probably it works like a placebo.
Placebo.
So the real question, Sharon, is that as an addition to your exercise therapy, it's invaluable. Yeah. So you just tell the
Right.
patient just to exercise. As a placebo effect in combination with a good exercise program, I think it's got a lot of value. So in that context, I think we can use it as a general principle. And all these three have some predetermined roles. So they're cheap, no side effects. So why not?
So in
These
my
days, no-
experience, Vijay, I've used these phytomedicines, plant extracts, something like this Boswellia and all the Rosiflex Trio kind of medicine, and they
Yeah,
actually
of course, yeah.
work
They
quite
come
well.
up with the curcumin things will contain that. So,
Yes.
As a combination to exercise therapy, not in isolation, but the
Absolutely.
combination, maybe it's a placebo effect, but you can really harvest the advantages when you use it correctly. Yeah,
The curcumin
So-
might have some anti-inflammatory action as well.
that's right. Yeah. So the first group reduces NSAID usage. So at least some papers showing weak evidence of that. That's a useful thing. The curcumin reduces inflammation. Somebody have inflammatory face, probably useful. Whereas the collagen is more for
Young
sports
age
side
athletes.
injuries for the aging athlete. Probably So these things they're cheap, easy to use. Probably placebo, but still why not? But it's cheap, we should argue against it. Yeah.
The glucosamine chondroitin sulfate combination has shown a lot of patients put on weight because of fluid retention, and that is quite detrimental in the management of
In high
arthritis.
doses, yeah. We
Yeah,
don't get those high doses in India. So if you in high doses, yes, they can cause some diabetic issues as well. They can cause some gastrointestinal effects as well. But they were in high doses. Okay, so we'll move on to the.
May I ask one question?
Yes, yes, Mukesh.
How many days do you recommend all this? I usually ask them to take for 3 months and then stop along with the other modalities, all these nutraceutical supplements.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
So what's the
3-4
duration
months
you use
or
it
even
for?
6 months they can take. And
Okay.
then if you need to repeat the course, you can repeat the course. They're only, supplements. Yeah. But they do reduce the need for NSAIDs, and that's a good thing.
Agreed.
So we'll move on to the deloading brace. So who is there? Vikash, you use
Yeah.
them in early. This is the patient we're talking about. The early
Yeah.
AOA X-rays that you saw in that female patient. Did you use it or not?
I'll tell you about this patient. It has been an acute phase pain for 4 months. And as I read it, if I read it right, 85-year-old, acute pain.
No.
85
85
kg.
kg.
85
Sorry,
kgs.
85 kgs. I'm sorry.
the 50s, yeah.
85 kg in 50s. So the issue is that offloader brace, I could not find too much of varus in the knee. That's one. The second is that in this particular case, I don't think offloader brace is really going to help because you did not specify it was a medial joint line pain only, or it seemed to me as if it was a global knee pain, which is what we are discussing. So how would an offloader brace in a patient like this help? It won't.
So who else is there? Alankar, yeah. So in your practice, when do you use this brace?
So I have used this brace only once or twice when the patient was like seriously morbid patient. I did not want to operate on him. So these are the indications when I would use offloader braces. Normal patients, I would not use offloader braces because primarily one, I don't think they work. There is no evidence conclusive that they work. And number two, compliance of use with patients is like really poor. Patients don't use it beyond 1 year.
So who uses it a lot? The panelists, who uses it a lot?
I use
Not at all.
Yeah, Clement uses
Lot
it a
of
lot. Anyone
I-
else?
I think it's a good.
I use it a lot, yes.
yeah.
You
I
should
use
find out whether it works or STO will work or not.
So
Can you
yeah,
give
I-
us,
the
a
patients who
recent letter?
benefit are with the virus who also have bone marrow edema, which is seen in MRI. These are the patients who really benefit without a meniscal tear. Okay, there is a subchondral overloading. We have a lot of bone marrow edema in the tibial condyle, medial tibial condyle, or femoral condyle. These patients really respond very well to unloading brace. If they don't want to wear a brace, I may even give a walker, ask them to do partial weight bearing or non-weight bearing. Just unload the knee for 3 to 4 weeks. They miraculously improve, especially the subchondral pain improves quite a bit in these patients. All you need to give rest for the bone to recover from the acute injury.
So two good. So basically, like Jacob said, when you want to see whether, so when you have more of an extraocular deformity, and then probably it has some value there. They don't want surgery instead of a HTO or as a trial for HTO. And as Clement said, when they have bone marrow edema, these are good indications to, but the classical patient with a focal pain, they will not benefit from AOA. So it's a very narrow spectrum who benefits from this, but you must have it in your armamentarium. It's expensive is one thing. And if they have pain on, they have night pain, obviously not going to work. They have alignment issue, more extraocular component. You may think of it. It's got a very narrow spectrum, but in those narrow spectrum, it has its role to play.
Vijay, would you take a point that if you use these braces, there is a lot of inhibition of muscles, and the muscles don't develop as nicely, and you find them they're wasting their muscles over a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not a substitute to a good exercise program. In combination with that, you can use that.
Yeah.
And there is, there are people. There's one physio from Ahmedabad who gives braces for everyone. That, of course, is a very wrong thing to do. Hitting everybody with the same hammer. That's absolutely a wrong thing to do. For narrow spectrum of patients, provided you have a good exercise program, it's got a role to play.
So Vijay, just quickly, the offloaders brace I don't use because, as you rightly said, they're expensive, and secondly, they require a lot of fitments where you have to have somebody who knows how to adjust those things. But I do use, the regular hinged knee braces or a kneecap, and I've almost invariably, most of my patients are quite happy with it. I don't know whether it has a placebo effect or
that I would think is a placebo effect. So, I mean, again, no harm in using that. The patient feels comfortable by all means, and they have a little bit proprioception as well, I think, with that.
So I've completely moved away from this offload or expensive braces, but some hinged braces or kneecaps.
There's two indications.
Neoprene ones are quite good.
I totally take your point, but there's two indications of when they have bone marrow edema and when you want to extract a deformity, you want to offload and see how it works. Two good indications to use it. The other things are a placebo, but a cheap placebo is always a good thing. Just because a placebo doesn't mean it's bad. Cheap placebo is a great thing to use.
Right.
So what about lateral heel wedge? Anybody uses it?
Waste of time.
No.
Waste of time.
No.
Well, in a nutshell, that's correct. But patients who have foot deformities, when they have a heel valgus, for example, or they have a flat foot, then if you correct that, this may be secondary to the knee problem, or it would be a trigger point for exacerbation of knee OA. So when you have a secondary problem in the foot, it may have a role. And actually, it was not a bad thing. The recommendation was moderate, much better than a lot of other interventions that we do. So patients who have secondary problems, again, a narrow spectrum, you may consider using that. Right, okay. So we have done all this, and 8 months later, patient comes back, and here she has got relief of pain only when she's taking NSAIDs, describes anterior and medial joint pain, increasing pain on walking and some wrist pain. She's got full range of movement. Weight action has not been successful. So here is the same patient again. And Parag, what do you want to do?
So, we've done all this. We've done the rehab. We've done the
rehab, everything we've done,
NSAIDs. So my next thing will be, I would think of some kind of an intra-articular injection. Because it's just 8 months, and I will ask her how much is the pain disabling her. If it's not too much, then I would think of an intra-articular option. I will give her the option of hyaluronic acid, and also I will suggest a steroid injection to her, and I will tell her the pros and cons of both. But I will talk her into taking a steroid.
I think, but we'll all agree on that. Anybody against injections in the knee?
I'm not against it, but we don't have an MRI yet. Won't anybody?
Yeah, you need to have an MRI and scanogram.
So never steroids. Never steroids. I agree for hyaluronic acid. I agree for PRP, stromal vascular fraction if the patient opts for and agrees for, but never steroid.
Never steroid. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else has got strong views?
I never use steroid as well. Completely with that.
Really? Okay.
I had one.
Why is that, Sharan? You don't do steroids?
No, there's a fair amount of evidence that steroid just increases the degradation of cartilage over a period of time. It'll come back with a vengeance, and I don't think it's a long-term benefit as well. It could benefit hugely if there is tendinitis all around and stuff like that. If we can focus on that and do physio, I would be more happy than putting steroid into the joint.
We'll look at
Correct.
each one in detail.
Agree with
yeah.
Sharan.
Okay.
Agree
So
with Sharan.
we will use stem cell therapy for this.
Well,
That,
not stem cell therapy exactly to be specific, but stromal vascular fraction has worked well with me.
But all this stromal vascular fraction or PRP have the same effect of anti-inflammatory. They just reduce the inflammation. They don't have any effect on cartilage. So simple steroid can work. Simple steroid can work.
Just hang on a sec. Yeah. So the literature, Sharan, that you tell about that the steroids is bad for joints, you got to interpret with a bit of caution, yeah. Because many of them are sponsored studies, and whenever you see this Regenex, you always have to be worried, that they are promoting something else. Because multi-billion-dollar company, they have a big budget to promote a lot of things, yeah. And they say the local anesthetic is bad as well. Okay, local anesthetic is bad and steroids. And some of the senior surgeons here would have given 10,000 injection steroids at all, yeah. So, it's very difficult to buy that.
No. But can I ask a question?
So they said Marcaine is bad, so they moved on to Ropivacaine. Why bother? Why argue that? So Ropivacaine is supposed to be fine at least. There are no studies to say it's bad. And steroids is bad when given in the end-stage disease.
Right.
That will cause osteonecrosis. That's been documented. There's no proven detrimental effect given in early OA.
Yeah. So Sharan,
we all have. I've been for 3 years, 4 years with just one very cheap steroid injection. Yeah. So let's not discount that. So we'll move on to hyaluronic acid. Yeah.
Yeah. Before that, one point, Vijay.
Yeah.
So I also use steroids, unlike Sharan or Ashish. I use them quite often actually, and they give a dramatic relief, especially if the patient wants immediate relief that he has to go for some wedding or some tour. The only thing is when you use the anesthetic agent with that, Ropivacaine or whatever, don't use the one with the preservative. You get one without the preservative. And that is the one, because the preservative actually can cause a little bit of cartilage damage.
Yeah, point well taken. Yeah.
Word of caution.
Sachin, what is your thoughts on hyaluronic acid?
Oh, I'm quite fond of hyaluronic acid, not fond of steroids at all, except like what Parag just mentioned, to tide over a very serious situation, like a wedding is a very important thing, or somebody wants to travel. But otherwise, I think I use steroid once in 2 years or so. And one reason why I use it even less is because I saw my predecessors using it right, left, and center. That's the one that I had those days.
Yeah, Sachin,
comments on HA?
So for this particular patient?
Yeah,
no.
in general.
Yeah.
Okay. So in general, I think HA would be a good option, and definitely would prefer HA over cortisone unless we're dealing with an acute flare-up. And about 70% of patients with the kind of X-ray and the clinical scenario that you are describing would be happy for about anywhere between 12 to 18 months if they don't have a large coronal plane deformity.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So a lot of things. So there is some weak evidence that it does work, but all these are, if you look really closely, they are sponsored studies. You must interpret them with a pinch of salt. But again, very useful in your practice, and I use it a lot, and I think most of us would agree that we use it in our practice. Yeah.
Anyone for MRI before injection?
For what?
Yeah. Not any degenerative meniscal tear is the cause for that pain, or only arthritic we are thinking about?
They don't have mechanical symptoms. Yeah. So we described a patient who doesn't have any mechanical symptoms, no acute exacerbation of pain, chronic problem. That's a patient profile. Yeah. So we do understand, and that's a little different scenario.
So
I mean, you may find incident findings. In this case, if you do an MRI, you show a meniscal tear, etc. But without clinical symptoms, you don't want to act on that. Okay, we'll move on. We're allowed to cover. So we move on to PRP. Yes, Raju.
I don't use PRP for OA as yet. I use them for sports medicine indication, and in this particular instance, I would not be inclined to use them. I would probably be more inclined to use viscosupplement.
Okay, Sharan?
No experience at all. I never used that. Yeah.
So who uses it a lot for OA?
I use a little bit.
Jacob, yeah, Jacob.
I use LP-PRP and I use interleukin-1 receptor antagonist when I want to buy time. This patient, maybe I want to try and buy time. So I don't use viscose supplementation because I think it doesn't work. So I would use LP-PRP or one of the interleukin-1 receptor antagonists.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Even-
The problem with PRP is no standardization. In India, it's actually cheaper than many of the viscose supplementation brands like Synvisc One. Yeah. So I don't know how many are aware of that. Yeah. So it's about half the price only. So yeah, these are the more and more articles, maybe sponsored articles saying they do have a role in OA.
So Vijay, if I can just pitch in for a moment here. So today, I think we are very fortunate to have Mohit Bhandari among our ski group. And Mohit Bhandari runs this very nice unbiased platform called My Ortho Evidence. And if you check on his platform, his consensus is that HA is equal to PRP is equal to steroid is what you've put up. So
Yeah,
I
you
think,
hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So
I think in 2020 we can say
yeah.
steroid also used in early OA, not in late OA with risk of osteonecrosis. HA, all injections seem to have an anti-inflammatory effect, but there are some problems with steroids. It cannot be repeated, so you cannot use it in the long or medium term. That's one of the drawbacks. And if used in advanced disease, we have seen cases of, and that must be strictly avoided. We have bone-on-bone osteoarthritis, but we still have cartilage and more of an inflammatory component. And HA and PRP in acute flare-up, as Parag mentioned, will not be a great advice to use it when you have an acute flare-up. May flare things up more, but a more chronic management seems to be useful. Yeah. So that's all. Shall we all agreed? Anybody?
Yeah. So
agree on this?
Sachin, I have a question to you. So I actually feel that, you know, the conclusions what Mohit Bhandari showed in this slide, sometimes, you know, equating HA to a PRP to a steroid may not be the right thing to do. But have you seen this evidence? Have you read that article in detail? You have any more inputs on this, Sachin?
So I definitely read a lot of his work on My Ortho Evidence when I was sort of researching for one of my talks. We can definitely conclude that all the current evidence that we have, systematic reviews and meta-analysis, do suggest that HA is equal to PRP. Steroid is equal to HA is very much doubtful yet. Some studies do show that HA and steroid may give the same kind of clinical outcome with respect to subjective relief of symptoms, but have not been shown to alter the course of the disease as what HA will do. So HA equals PRP, that is what sort of is there for sure. Steroid and HA, clinically, the amount of relief that you get is equivalent, but the influence on the disease progression is not matched.
So what is the consensus? What should we advise our viewers who are on the webinar right now? What should be their intra-articular injection of choice? Is there any algorithm, Sachin or Alankar?
Acute flare-up with effusion, HA will not work. You have to use a steroid.
Okay. And when do you use a HA?
Immunocompromised patient, and there is no local sign of infection, then a steroid is probably the way to go. For all other sort of chronic issues, depending upon which way you want, you could either be using an HA or a PRP, depending upon your preference of use.
Can I ask something to the panel, our friends here? If you have an effusion and you take out an effusion, would you inject immediately?
Because you need to speak closer to your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better.
Yeah. So if you have an effusion and you are aspirating an effusion which is moderate, at that time, the same sitting you would like to inject one of these, or you would wait for a week or two, or then inject the second?
I think you inject a steroid actually. And effusion is a mark of inflammation.
Inflammation.
I think there's an inflamed joint there, and you need to have put a steroid inside. Yeah. The most powerful anti-inflammatory known to man is steroid. Yeah.
Vijay, for
Vijay, some people combine HA with steroid. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that actually.
That's because they're worried about the exacerbation of HA, so they want to sort of nullify that effect.
But is it a good idea to combine, or does it have any side effects?
HA can cause foreign body reaction, giant cell reaction. I've had biopsies. See, if at all you use HA, you want to use low molecular weight because it's more biologic and it probably doesn't help in tribology. So I would use, if at all I use low molecular weight Because I've had sit-in where I had severe reactions and had biopsy showing giant cell reactions. So I think I'm off HA.
So we have differing opinions here. Sachin, yeah.
So there are two products I think which we should be aware of. There is one which is called as Cingal, no conflict of interest, but Cingal is showing better results than the GF20 or the standard HA injection that we have. Cingal is a combination of HA and steroid in the same prefilled syringe. Again, now there is more and more research that is showing that if you combine HA with PRP, and they have now special concoctions in which HA and PRP are combined, they are showing better results than PRP.
Yeah, I came across those papers as well, but difficult to prove, you know. They're combining now different things. Each one doesn't prove by itself.
So it's like
different things. We're going into more murky territory. Yeah, so we'll leave it at that.
I think
it makes mathematical sense. Eh? You said steroid is equal to HA is equal to PRP. So steroid plus HA has to be greater than PRP.
Just a quick thing, Vijay, before we move from this. Will it change, the injection will change if it is an inflammatory arthritis as against osteoarthritis like a rheumatoid arthritis?
Absolutely. Rheumatoid is always cortisol.
I think only steroid will work in inflammatory arthritis, I think.
Absolutely. Correct.
Okay, let's move
Or what
on.
we did
So
so
now we
far
go
is
to
not let the patient leave you.
so the people, I mean, a lot of advocates here in India as well, who believe that it's the future of knee surgery itself. So regenerative, so they want to regenerate the cartilage. Now I want to make it very clear what we're talking about here is the use in elderly patients with OA and not with young patients post-traumatic focal. That we'll deal with another day. But today we're talking about elderly and who would use some kind of stem cell therapy in this. Parag?
So I have a bias and I am against stem cell therapy at this point of time. I used it sometimes. I use the BMAC thing, but in osteoarthritis it really doesn't work, and I have been very unhappy with the outcome of it. So at this point of time, I've stopped using it completely. I'm just waiting some more evidence to come in to hopefully it should get refined, and probably I'll use it a little later. But at this time, it's a no for me.
It's interesting when you read about the usage of stem cells in OA. It again works by an anti-inflammatory effect. Yeah. So the equation expands. Steroid equals HA equals PRP equals
stem cells.
So we're not regenerating anything here for sure. Everybody agree on that?
Yes.
No, nobody to contradict that. Yeah. So that's a very good message. I think we need to put across to our youngsters who seem to be carried away with what the company guys tell us. Yeah.
The supporters of stem cell actually advocate that. They say that it regenerates and it actually grows cartilage and reverses.
That's correct. Yeah. So we'll come to that. Yeah. So they say it regenerates cartilage, and of course, very weak evidence, all sponsored studies, and the problem is it's very expensive. Literature only focus on focal post-traumatic lesions, and the maximum it can do is an anti-inflammatory effect. It has got no regenerative potential in OA. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah, yeah.
But what the youngsters shouldn't fall for is, look at this ad, rest in peace knee replacement. Who knew amputating the joint and inserting metal parts wouldn't help? And the knee replacement is supposed to have died in 2020, along with COVID. Such misleading thing is what is really misleading is it is not a thing for knee replacement. I can even buy the argument if they want to use it instead of PRP, early arthritis. I mean, that's okay. But to say it's an alternative for knee replacement, we're talking about end-stage disease. They're talking about end-stage disease, and that's really, really a wrong thing to do. That's misleading everyone.
That tombstone could be of all the orthoplasty surgeons as well.
No, but this is playing the fear psychosis of the patients, basically.
And it's very important to have a positive environment for the cells to work. In the absence of a good biomechanical environment, all the cell therapy, PRP will fail.
Absolutely, yeah. But when you say it's an alternative to surgery, patients jump on it. That is feeding on, somebody said, on the fear psychosis. It's really, really a wrong thing. And I think all of us must, as a body, must make a strong statement to condemn this. And it says, don't replace, regrow. I mean, it is never can be an alternative for a replacement. Yeah.
It's like using Dr. Ortho oil by Javed Akhtar, where people say that it will recreate the oil in the joint.
One of you will replace his knee. Don't worry.
Yeah, so very clear message, I think, from the SKI that it is not reset any cartilage, can never ever be the next 20 years, can never ever be an alternative to knee replacement. Yeah, whether it has some role in early OA, it's controversial. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Okay. And then, if at all, the last 5 years, the enthusiasm on stem cell therapy for OA has come down rather than going up. And a lot of promise in 2014, 2013. The next 5 years has been a downhill trend. A lot of papers saying it's got no regenerative potential at all. If at all it's going downhill rather than uphill. Although a lot of centers in India market it and use it. Yeah. As an alternative to knee replacement, they want patients listed for knee replacement to come to them. That's really a wrong thing. That's cheating, and that must be avoided. I think we all agree on that.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. This is a different patient now. So she's 55 years old. She again is a little overweight, significant knee pain, not cope with ADL, significant sleep disturbance, did not respond to a proper. So when patient says I had IFT for 10 days, that's not physiotherapy. It's a proper rehab, probably supervised by yourself, and all not responded, and she comes with this now.
So is this a single joint weight bearing X-ray or is it a supine X-ray?
One leg is a weight bearing X-ray. All the X-rays that I show, we never take non-weight bearing X-rays, single leg in our unit. Yeah, so all of
that was one of the questions which came to me. That's why I asked. One of the viewers wanted to ask, is it important to take a single joint weight bearing? So that's the answer. So
absolutely, yeah, you have to take that. Yeah, you should, and you need to work with your radiographer and get good X-rays. You get a good lateral view, very important. You get a good AP view, and unless you work with a radiographer, you never get good X-rays. Okay.
Absolutely.
So who wants to? Vikas?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
This is a patient profile.
Yeah, I know. 55-year-old, 81 kgs is a high BMI patient, and looks like a complete medial joint line disease. So I would straight away get an MRI done immediately to see the position of the ligaments.
To see the position of the?
To the ligaments, the ACL.
Why?
And
Why?
Because I'm looking at an intervention at this point of time.
Yeah, but lateral X-ray says clearly that it's an intact ACL.
Is that,
We'll go for a valgus stress X-ray.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean.
But that is more of a clinical.
So we got X-rays. So
yeah.
Who will go for a MRI apart from Vikas?
No.
Bhushan?
Also will go for MRI.
Yeah, I'll go for MRI.
Bhushan, why would you do an MRI? Bhushan, your reasoning?
We're planning for surgical intervention now.
Yes.
She has failed conservative management.
Yes.
Now either it's a grade 4 arthritis. So my two options are either a unicompartmental or a total knee replacement.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
And for that, I think it's always better to get an MRI, because quite a few times you're surprised on table. You see a big lateral defect on the femoral condyle. You can find a buccal anterior lateral meniscus or a radial lateral meniscus, which will change your management option. You can always have both the things on table and decide on table, but better you go with one plan in mind.
When I intervene, yeah. A buccal tear of the lateral meniscus will be symptomatic, yeah.
Yes.
Many times we'll find asymptomatic tears, degenerative tears, because degenerative disease, and they are not to be taken into. The problem with the MRI in this situation is that it confuse what you're going to do. And I think the general opinion is MRI is indicated only when there is an acute and chronic symptoms in this patient. That's when an MRI would be indicated. And there's a chronic pain, chronic disease, MRI would probably confuse the picture. Yeah. Would you
Clinically,
agree?
lateral joint line tenderness.
Just one more thing is I also have to see the lateral part of the patellofemoral joint. If that is affected, then I'm more keen to go towards a total than a partial knee replacement.
Yeah, that is extremely rare in this situation, I must say. That's a primary patellofemoral OA that comes in, which is extremely rare in this type of scenario. But anyway, I know how to do skyline view. But so we want to do an MRI now. So let us summarize saying in this presentation, chronic presentation, MRI is useless. And what you probably most relevant is a stress X-ray and a scanogram. Anybody wants to say yes, no?
So is Vijay, if the patient is not willing for a replacement, would you offer HTO?
But but we are not decided what to do for the patient yet.
Okay.
Okay.
We think probably time for surgery now, as everybody agreed.
Absolutely.
But what surgery we haven't decided yet.
Vijay,
So
for me, it's a clearly an AMO.
Quickly, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's a clearly an AMO with ACL intact. And I wouldn't fight if somebody wants to do an MRI scan, but it's bone on bone AMO and 55. For me, I'm tending more towards a uni.
Uni, yeah. So before that, there are some things to to evaluate the patient. Yeah. So the more relevant investigations would be a stress X-ray and a scanogram rather than an MRI. And when you have an acute on chronic, patient has been sort of going on for a few years. Suddenly she comes and says, excruciating pain, I cannot walk, and then or mechanical symptoms. Then of course, no question that you need an MRI. Yeah. So we'll all agree on this.
Agreed. And we also need to know the amount of flexion deformity. FFD.
No flexion deformity. Yeah.
Okay.
Full range of movement.
For inflammatory arthritis.
So the X-rays are very important. Unless you do a valgus stress X-ray or a scanogram, I don't think you can do an MRI. But I also, might do an MRI in certain cases. It's not a complete no. But if you do an MRI without doing the special X-rays,
when something doesn't add up, when there is something doesn't add up, when you have lateral side pain, then of course an MRI when you are not sure. But when the picture is like this, medial pain and some anterior pain, I think MRIs. The problem with MRI is it's not that it's not it can take you on the wrong track.
Right.
Okay. Here's the
half of the patients come to the MRI.
Yes.
The chronic presentation that we had, and these are the varus stress, the valgus stress, and that's just scano. It does not show much of malalignment. Yeah, I've not drawn the lines.
Right. Yeah. But it's seen quite clearly.
So, Mukesh, you want to take that on?
This is an ideal indication to do UKR. So I'll go for UKR. It's a primary OA. It's not RA.
So what did the stress X-rays tell you?
It's a correctable varus and there is no lateral joint line reduction.
Yeah. So what about people who don't do UKRs? They're all keeping quiet.
So here is a good case for me to consider an osteotomy, a high tibial osteotomy.
Correct. I agree.
Keep that in mind, and I would think of a HTO.
My reason for UKR would be carry on.
Yeah. So this is not a case for totally, definitely a UKA or a HTO. Yes, Ashish, go on.
So I agree with you. For me, uni is not an option here. Patient is a high BMI, and she's 55. I would consider doing an arthroscopy, see if there is any meniscus tear, and see the lateral joint line. If the lateral joint line is the lateral side is normal.
No, they told you the symptoms. Yeah, there's no lateral symptoms. Only medial joint pain she has.
No, see, symptoms are different. You see arthroscopically, if the lateral joint is arthritic, if the cartilage is worn out, HTO is not an option, and you would straight away go for TKR. That's what I do. And if the lateral side is normal arthroscopically, then I would proceed to HTO.
But again, BMI is the issue with HTO.
No. Yeah, exactly. Why would that be?
Yeah, because more than 30 BMI is a contraindication.
So for me,
high BMI is for UKR.
Gentlemen, let me summarize. Yeah. So generally, we'll come to that. But generally, short obese patients are not good candidates for H2O. Here is a deformity. Usually, the lines cross the joint. Yeah, they're usually the ones that are, and they have more of extraocular component. This you would call as an intraocular varus. That it's a spectrum. We understand, but the problem with the lateral X-ray, I mean the valgus stress tells you how the lateral compartment is. Probably is the most important indicator of how the cartilage is rather than the MRI. So we have done that. I think most people would agree on that. So
yes.
Yeah. So we will.
So Vijay.
Yeah. A couple of questions before we go to what you did. If you can just go to the previous slide, there are some questions which I have got. So the first question is there any role of arthroscopic debridement in this situation? So
the good thing that's been brought up, there's strictly no role for an arthroscopic washout. Yeah. So when they have mechanical symptoms, they have acute on chronic presentation where they have a root tear, etc. then role for arthroscopy. But arthroscopic washout, study after study after study has shown there's got no role to play. The message is very
So
clear.
Parag, I never do arthroscopic washout. That's out.
Yes.
The only indication for arthroscopy is if I'm doing an HTO and I want to confirm that the lateral joint line is normal and the cartilage is good, and then I proceed to HTO. For patients less than 65, uni is not an option for me.
Okay.
Because that's what the literature says.
Another question which has come up from the viewers is, what are the role of the blood investigations? What kind of blood workup should be done for these patients of arthritic knees? So anybody wants to take that? What kind of?
Well, in the interest of time, we'll move on, Parag. We have signs of inflammatory arthritis. They have, foot, for example, early morning stiffness, and the X-ray picture is not classical of OA. You investigate them. Otherwise, you just have to call it as a classical OA and move on. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on.
Vijay sir, do you mind if I just put in a word?
Yes, Adarsh, please. Yeah.
Yeah, in this kind of a situation, Dr. Ashish sir was mentioning that he wouldn't do it in a patient age less than 65, the uni. But what we have done at the Sunshine is that we have kind of had a bimodal indication. So even like a little younger age, we do a uni to get a little bit of a time, maybe 15, 20 years. And in the older age, because that definitely that's a less morbid procedure. If they have this kind of an X-ray, we would like to do it. So even the Oxford team also had mentioned that they do it the similar way.
Yeah, point well taken, Adarsh. The uni has got a bimodal peak, as we all know. But the thing you should not do is, if you are not experienced in the uni, a young patient comes to you once in a year, you must not go in and do a uni on that patient.
Yeah, definitely, sir. Yes.
Experience unit, it's got a bimodal peak all over the world. And I think that's a fair comment from Adarsh. Yeah.
Okay.
So we will move on with that. So I think it has got a.
Vijay, can I quickly? Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, Sharon.
I have my own. Yeah. My only point I was trying to say is, if it is bone on bone, for me, a HTO is a dicey thing to do. If it is joint pace decreased, then I would look at a HTO. Sachin has got strong views on this. That's why I wanted to put it up. What does he think about it?
Yeah, Sachin.
Yeah, Sachin. Sachin, you're not audible.
The best results. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. The best results for uni are only when you have bone-on-bone disease. If you don't have bone-on-bone disease, then your results are. No. That's one. And if you don't have bone-on-bone disease and HTO is a better procedure, the results of HTO in the presence of bone-on-bone disease are inferior to those when you don't have bone-on-bone disease. So both sides.
Yeah, we agree on that. The problem is, the overnight the patient doesn't become bone-on-bone. Yeah, so it's a spectrum there, and I will summarize it just in a while. Yeah. Okay, so this is a sort of a classical profile for a uni. That's what we did, and the radiology is very fascinating. That's the reason why you don't need an MRI. Here is a patient of mine from the US. He came to me for a uni. You can see the right side is a more advanced disease, and that's how the lateral side looks. This is for the benefit of juniors. You can see how the posterior third of in a good lateral X-ray is eroded, telling you that you do not have AMOA, you have tri-compartment OA. So classical, you can see that. Yeah, same patient, same X-ray, weight-bearing X-ray. Here he has got an AMOA, and that's how the lateral X-ray looks like. And you can see, so both X-rays look a little similar. This is AMOA. How do I know it's AMOA? I'm looking at the lateral view. You can see that the posterior third is intact. Only the mid third has been sclerosis here. Classical. How do I know this is tri-compartment OA? Because the posterior third is involved. Classical X-rays. The pedal joint looks almost the same. So the best index of looking at whether it's the AMOA or a tri-compartmental is your X-ray. Good, well done X-rays. So this is a nice illustration of that. Yeah. So whereas you have the little different presentation, when you have an acute and chronic presentation, there's no malalignment, and then you may do an MRI, you have a root repair, or you have an unstable meniscus, degenerate tear, you may deal with it. Or if you find bone marrow edema, then the subchondroplasty, you put calcium. This was very popular a few years ago, but now again, it has fallen into disrepute. It's not very useful, but it was popular 3-4 years ago. So acute and chronic presentation, an MRI is very important to look at all these things where you can avoid a major surgery. but it's very important to rule out, to keep in mind that alignment is normal. Then you can do these things. We go to the next patient. He's 51 years old. He's got left knee pain for 18 months, seen by many orthopedic surgeons. Various conservative options have been tried. And he has full range of movement. He's 68. He's got no comorbidities. Very active patient. Yeah. Alankar, you want to take it?
HTO.
Yes, Alankar, you consider an HTO. Anybody else?
We like to go for scanogram.
Yeah. In all these patients whom we are talking about AMOA or early arthritis or just beyond AMOA, the spectrum, I think a scanogram is vital. And if you're not doing scanograms in your practice, you really must not be dealing with knee arthritis. You're really not doing justice in 2020. A scanogram is absolutely vital. Yeah.
Can I put
So
further points, sir?
Jacob, you want to take this? What would you do, Jacob?
Only issue is that if you're doing an STO, will you correct it to the Fujisawa point, or are you going to make it neutral?
So what's the degree of correction?
Anybody does not
Yeah, yes, sir. Sir, one interesting point in this X-ray is the metaphyseal varus. If you see a varus knee with a metaphyseal varus, these are the patients who respond very well to HTO rather than the intra-articular varus, which we saw in your second case.
Yes.
Having said that, it depends, sir. If the amount of correction you aim just lateral to the lateral tibial spine, the junction of the lateral tibial spine with the medial with the plateau there. Normally, we don't do excessive corrections for early disease, but if the involvement is quite significant, probably we'll aim in shifting the axis to the Fujisawa point.
Yeah, Jacob, to answer your question, Fujisawa point is sort of people are going off it and doing much less correction. They just want to push it into valgus. They don't want to go 30 to 40, percentile as described by Fujisawa. So that is a thing. And this patient has got HTO written all over him. So he's an active guy. He's got only discomfort, no focal pain, active-related discomfort, and all that. So I think a scanogram is a must. And that is the pre-op. And this is the post-op scanogram. We cut it into valgus.
Yeah.
Typically, a patient who do an HTO, this line must be falling outside your knee. That's another way of looking for metaphyseal varus. And it doesn't do much of joint line, metaphyseal varus. These are classical. They do extremely well with the HTO. And I think all knee surgeons must have a repertoire, either a colleague or yourself doing a HTO. Otherwise, you're just not, standard of care in 2020.
Exactly. So Jacob, to answer your question, if you're doing an HTO, I would never get it to neutral. I would definitely overcorrect it. I would go to the Fujisawa point, or at times a little more than that also. So,
should I ask this to Dr. Parag?
No, I think Vijay said he wouldn't do the Fujisawa point. I thought I would do that.
Sachin will hear your view.
Yes, Sachin. You unmute it.
Yeah. So I think one aspect here is that if you see the post-op X-ray, the joint line appears to be tilted. Bhushan will be discussing this aspect with me on this, that the joint line should not get tilted. So what we see here is that we actually need to measure the MPTA and the LDFA. And I actually feel that the MPTA here is more than 90 degrees. So if the MPTA is more than 90 degrees, then this patient may not have the world's best result with his HTO. If you go back to the previous slide, in which we saw extra-articular type of deformity which was there, such patients, I think many a times I would prefer to treat them with what is called as a TCVO, or a transcondylar valgus osteotomy, in which you only elevate the medial tibial condyle and not take the hinge point right down to the lateral end. So Bhushan, your inputs on this particular X-ray and technique.
If you look at the scanogram pre-operatively, you can see some subluxation also. So if that's the case, then usually you need a bigger correction. And the moment you do a correction more than 12, 13 millimeters, you need to start worrying about your joint line convergence angle. If your joint line becomes oblique, irrespective of wherever you got your Mikulicz point, that is going to fail in 7 to 8 years. a properly done HTO without a tilting joint line should give 15-20 years relief, in my opinion.
Correct.
Now, a TCVO is a good option when there is subluxation, and when you do a preoperative planning, if your expected MPTA goes to beyond 93, then I think either you're doing something wrong. You might need a double level correction or a TCVO.
Correct.
I think this is fairly recent for most of the younger audience, but this is something to see
So the
in
question,
each and every scanogram.
question comes, Bhushan and Sachin, how do you control that? So what are the steps, what are the tips you would do?
So the
to
first thing
control
is
and
always
not avoid
planning this.
the
So
joint
you
line?
always plan your osteotomy with whatever technique you want to do. You can use a tracing paper and a goniometer. You can use a computer software like we do, but you need to plan the surgery and actually measure the angles after the surgery to see what you're achieving. If your mechanical proximal tibial medial angle is going beyond 93, the 90 is a higher limit, then I think that's my cutoff point. I don't know what Sachin wants to add to this.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So anyways, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we proceed. Yeah.
Points on HTO. Yeah. So these days, I think for the younger audience, the gold standard is the problem with HTO was it was not standardized a few years ago. Now I think everybody will agree that it's pretty standard. You have to do medial open wedge biplanar HTO with preservation of the lateral hinge, stabilized with a load-bearing locking plate. With all these adjectives, I think that's the gold standard today. And the issue is that it was very the results were not reproducible, but now with this technique, it's very reproducible technique, consistent results, and you get early function. Yeah. So all the negatives of earlier years have gone now, and all centers seem to get good. And a lot of published reports saying excellent outcomes in the medium and the long term. Would anybody want to add anything or contradict anything?
May I ask one to Dr. Parag?
Yes.
You told you will go Fujisawa beyond Fujisawa. So do you counsel your patient about limb length discrepancy with such a valgus?
No, so when I say Fujisawa, the point I was trying to make is that I will definitely overcorrect it. If you see the
that will lead to some lengthening.
Not really, 1 millimeter beyond Fujisawa point will not actually cause that lengthening. So, if you see Koshino's work, Koshino has done a lot of work. He used to be a strong proponent of close wedge, and he always said that you should correct to 185, 186, 187. So that's what he taught, and that has helped. And when I moved from close wedge to open wedge, I always saw that I slightly got that overcorrection, and it helps in good pain relief also. And sometimes you lose correction. So even if you lose a couple of millimeters, you still are okay. So that's one more reason why I overcorrect.
Parag, your point well taken, but world over now they find the Fujisawa point is too much of correction now.
Right.
So they're coming
also
little.
Depends on the severity of arthritis in the medial compartment. If it's grade 4, then I think we should go to 60% plus in terms of your correction. If it's grade 3 or grade 2, it's entirely acceptable to go between 55 to 60%. But it's grade 4 arthritis on the medial side that you have to push it more laterally. Right. I think that's what I feel at least.
Unless you're a sports person, you may not like it. Am I right?
I don't think you'll be doing HTO for any sports person. It's usually a career-ending thing. If you do HTO for anyone, they can't run properly afterwards. So I warn the patient that your running career is going to be over. I think the only game you can play is table tennis after that, or golf. That's what I tell them.
One quick question which has come 2-3 times on my WhatsApp now. So the question is that, is there any role of proximal fibular osteotomy? These people now.
Sachin is expert in that now.
I didn't know Sachin does that. So
Parag
question has come. So very quickly.
I'll cover it, Parag. I'll cover it. We got slides for that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's go on.
So in 2020, both have become extremely reliable with gratifying surgeries. Yeah, both. Provided it's technically done correctly, many technical issues to both, and you must have a volume. You must have a volume, and you become very good over time. And it gives really both of them give extremely pleasing results in 2020. I think we all would agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is always what juniors ask is how to choose. It's a tough choice. They feel it's tough, like choosing between Android and iPhone, but actually it's not actually. Yeah. it's a very theoretical question to ask, in my opinion. Yeah. So if you see that the spectrum here, you can see that for H2O, it's partial thickness cartilage loss. As a lot of panelists brought out, it's not really gross bone-on-bone OA. It's an younger patient, higher activity level, significant extra component, as Clement said. Typically, they'll have activity-related discomfort. Of doing some particular activity, they'll get discomfort. The short lateral fat patient is a relative contraindication. Whereas here we have bone-on-bone changes, older patient, usually female patient, obese patient, bone-on-bone erosion, you see lesser activity level, probably night pain, little or no malalignment, focal pain. The short lateral pain is not a contraindication. They're actually good candidates for this procedure. Now, putting both together, AP instability is a problem in both, but it's more readily addressed in a H2O. Lack of full flexion is a problem in both, but again, more accommodated in a H2O rather than a uni. And only mild ML laxity is acceptable in both. So in summary of this topic, is that anybody wants to add anything?
Yeah, so the night pain sometimes we face in root tear. Probably that would be a
point taken. Sometimes, we
acute on chronic situation. We have to suspect the root tear.
So if you put the patient at the extreme, it's very easy to know who is a candidate for which procedure. And obviously there'll be a gray area in the middle, but that's not a very big area. And so it's not, in most 90% of patients, not difficult to make out. It's a better option of the two. And I think you must have both in the armamentarium. I say I don't do unis, I don't do H2Os. I don't think today standard of care. You must have, or a colleague of yours who's able to address this. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah. So one point I would like to make is that, Vijay, if along with this, it's a different scenario that if a patient has a ligament insufficiency at times, which he may have, then the H2O has an advantage because you can do a slope modification also. And
that's what I said. AP instability.
Yes.
But both we can do a slope modification and deal with AP instability, whereas you can't do that in a uni.
Correct.
Unless you're going to do a ACL reconstruction, we'll not go into that. Yeah. So
what about if you have SPONK?
SPONK.
Yeah. Will you do straight for a uni or will you go for H2O?
SPONK. A well-established SPONK, I'll do a TKR.
Exactly. I was just going to say that because you never know.
You will do a uni?
Sachin will do a uni, I think.
I will do uni.
SPONK needs a TKR. It's as simple as that. Really.
Why is that? You're what unicompartmental disease? You're jumping.
It can progress.
Other side.
Well, I mean, you don't have bone to sit your components on that. You don't know how far the disease is gone. And I mean, you may get away in a patient or two, but if you want reliable results, I think you have to do a TKR on them.
Okay.
So I think here we need to sort of differentiate between the bone marrow edema and the SPONK that you get on the tibial side and that on the femoral side. If you have it on the tibial side, then definitely uni is out of question. If you have it on the femoral side, if the whole thing gets a sclerotic rim after a while, then you can do a uni. If you are doing surgery when you don't have a sclerotic rim and you've not developed the classic osteonecrosis per se.
Yeah, Sachin, you and me both have done. I've done at least 500 resurfacings on avian, and on his bone marrow edema and all is okay. But if follow them in the long term, it's a different ball game. Okay.
So what's the conclusion?
I won't do that. I mean, it's not easy to keep your femoral component on necrotic bone. Although you think it's bone marrow edema, you never know how the avian is going to progress. So, I think TKR is a much safer option in those patients. Yeah.
So bone marrow edema, Sachin, is one of the beginning evidence of SPONK. You don't know, some of the bone marrow edemas may progress to SPONK. So
he's differentiated tibia from the femur.
Yeah, so tibia, I don't think I would like to do it. On the femoral side, when we know that the history is going on for about 3 months and you see a sclerotic rim, I would not be hesitant to do a UKR. I have got follow-up of about 5 patients who are more than almost about 18 years now with having uni done, and they are doing really well. So
yeah, great, Sachin. Yeah. I will take your point. But I think, a larger series and all, we need to, I mean, I know the Oxford guys say it's okay.
Yeah.
But the Oxford guys are very, what shall we say, very flippant about everything. They just say, okay, so what, do a TKR, but we want us our private patients and we need to be careful. Yeah.
So Vijay, we have about 15 minutes more. No problem.
Yeah, okay. I think that'll be just correct. Yeah.
15 to 20 minutes. Yeah.
So a lot of level 1 papers saying, the unicompartmental knee is, not that each one is superior, both are equal. And if patient selection is important, and both gives very, very, very good results in 2020. And I think everyone treating the knee arthritis must have some method of offering the patient, not that what you like, but what is the patient more suitable for, whether it's a uni or a HTO.
Vijay, uni is, see, HTO is so versatile, whereas there is very less indications for a good uni, good indications.
I think you're very skeptical about uni, but I think a lot of us here would, or once you build up experience, you find you cross all these.
So HTO is, I think, more versatile, and as compared to uni, you have to be very choosy for uni.
That's why I'm saying you can argue both ways. There is literature says there's no superiority one over the other. Patient selection is important. That's the bottom line.
Right.
Okay, now we come to another patient.
Yes.
He's also in her 50s, obese, significant knee pain. She has got ankle pain and shin pain, and did not respond again to proper non-operative management. Yeah.
Okay.
So who wants to take that?
Vikas?
Adarsh, you take that, Adarsh.
Yes, sir. So I would again definitely like to get the stress X-rays first. It does look like a bone-on-bone from here.
This is a stress X-ray. This is a stress X-ray.
Yeah, and then I would like a valgus stress as well. And because what did you say? 57 years old. So I still again wouldn't hesitate to consider a uni again, sir.
Yeah. Anybody has got any other opinion? Kanchan?
Bone metabolism.
Yeah.
Yeah, uni is an option, but at this age, HTO is an equally good option for me here.
Yeah, somebody was saying metabolic. Yeah, so this is probably the type of
juxta-articular osteoporosis is there.
Yeah, and then they have. I didn't want to say back pain because it'd be obvious, but she had back pain, neck pain, basically pain all over, and she also got knee pain. And although it looks like almost bone on bone, we focus on this and we jump on this to do the knee replacement, and they end up worse than what they are. And this is probably you have to push yourself to say it's bone on bone. So when it's not really classical bone on bone, you got to apply your mind to it. And some of them fare very worse than that. So the point I want to make to the juniors is that so somebody wanted this, Adarsh wanted this.
Yes, sir.
Change, I think the management. Valgus is okay.
Yeah.
But the point I want to make is that any kind of arthroplasty does not do well in partial thickness cartilage loss. This is now and again. And the commonest reason why TCAR has got a relatively bad name in the community is because people do knee replacement and a partial knee replacement in patients who do not have full cartilage thickness loss. The source of the pain is not the knee in those patients, it's something else. And you are offering a treatment which will not benefit them in any way. And this is the commonest reason I feel that we have in our country that we have a bad reputation for knee replacement. And the other knee looks like this, and the one knee maybe tricompartmental, so they just get on and do a knee replacement. And they go and tell their neighbor who really needs a knee replacement that knee replacement doesn't work. So my message to juniors is that please do not do any kind of arthroplasty in a patient who does not have well-established bone-on-bone disease. Does anybody want to add on or contradict that?
One of the common things
absolutely correct, sir. Yes, sir.
Is patients undergoing TCAR on one side and they have mild to moderate arthritis on the other side, and surgeons do a bilateral knee replacement. It's quite a few times seen that the knee which was less bad becomes the worst knee after surgery.
Absolutely. So, we have seen that so many times, many times.
Especially for the youngsters and people who are quite keen on doing bilateral. It's quite important to understand both the knees should be equally bad to do bilateral.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you can do a uni on them as well. So you must establish very sure that you're dealing with bone-on-bone OA before you offer them arthroplasty. I think that's one point that you want to take from this whole exercise today, or a roundtable discussion is this point. Please do not do arthroplasty when you do not have bone-on-bone disease. So what about TCAR for monocompartmental OA? So that's the other issue that we are not covered here. So here's a monocompartmental OA. you can see that the posterior third is intact. Now, people like Parag, you don't do uni, yeah? Am I right?
Not many. My numbers are not too high. I do unis, but not as much.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on doing TCAR in this AMOA?
Yeah. So, for a person who doesn't do any unis at all, or doesn't do any high tibial osteotomy, then this is the case. If you've tried all non-operative modalities, is a knee replacement for me. It also at times depends on what is your judgment of progression, because in a uni, you do a uni and it progresses to a lateral compartment in a couple of years, then that's bad. So age is one thing I'll keep in mind, and also the X-rays, and in this particular case, an MRI.
No, Parag. Now the thing that we want to know is how does TCAR? So I don't know to do uni, so I do TCAR on this patient. How do you think it'll fare?
It'll do very well. It'll do very well. I have no doubt in my mind. If I do a knee replacement, there's no doubt that patient.
Anybody has got a contradictory opinion on that?
Can I put in a point? Not contraindicatory.
Yes, Adarsh.
Yeah, sorry, sir. So, I mean, of course, we've only started doing unis since the last 2 years. Before that, all these cases would have been done at TCAR. In fact, we have a paper where we studied all the TCARs and we found 45% of our patients undergoing TCAR had AMOA. Then we did another paper recently to study whether the patients undergoing TCAR with AMOA, are they faring better or do they have a little worse satisfaction? And we did find that TCAR patients undergoing TCAR for AMOA, they had a little bit less satisfaction than uni for AMOA.
Yeah, I think the point that's well taken, Adesh. That's the point I want to bring out as well, that this dissatisfaction in that we all talk about 20%. But if you look at really those patients who have dissatisfaction, a lot of them are early disease. And you see this, they have, the spectrum, of course. The earlier the disease, the worse they do. If you do 1 or 2 kilogram state, they do very badly. We do 3, 4, again. So you need to have established tri-compartment OA for the TCAR to be. We do have patients who have done very well as well. But if you have a large cohort, you'll find more and more unhappy patients if you do in AMOA.
Yeah,
but if you don't know how to do a uni, then it's okay. It's perfectly okay to do that. But keep in mind that once your volume increases, you get more unsatisfactory patients. And that's been proven in literature again and again.
So uni definitely is a more natural option. It preserves your ligaments. And nowadays, that is why we are talking about bicruciate retaining total knee replacement. So the whole point is, if you retain the cruciates, uni is a natural joint.
That is one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin is, how does TCAR fare itself? We have your whole pool of TCAR patients.
Correct.
The unhappy patients, maybe you look back, maybe your early arthritis patients. Yeah. More. There are some who could do extremely well, of course, but some, if you have a large volume, it will start to show up. That those are the unhappy patients.
Vijay, what level will you think the patellofemoral joint is going to play a role here? You ignored the patella completely here in all your.
In uni?
In anything, in your osteotomies or uni. When do you ever look? You didn't come in anything on the patellofemoral joint at all. Neither symptoms, neither X-ray.
The patellofemoral joint, at least what I believe, is an entirely different disease, which manifests as chondromalacia, etc. And they have, I think, a lot of arthroscopic procedures do work in those situations. But that's not knee OA. So AMOA and tricompartment OA are a little different disease from the primary patellofemoral OA. And the OA, the patellofemoral changes that occur secondary to knee OA can be ignored.
Every case. Every case. Every case. You don't bother about lateral side, medial side, nothing.
Can I add some points?
I don't agree.
Clement. Please, you want to say a point? Clement, yeah.
Sir, I've been focusing more on patellofemoral problems in my H2O patients, especially preoperatively. They have a lateral patellar pain, which is due to an excessive lateral pressure syndrome. I often do taping, like Mecanose taping, to see how much relief is getting. So many times nowadays, we add patellofemoral surgeries also along with H2O, something like a lateral retinacular lengthening. People who have a pronounced lateral osteophyte in the patella, they undergo a partial lateral fasciectomy also. And in fact, some of the patients, elderly patients, like 65 plus, who have OA, but the source of pain is a patellofemoral pain. We've been doing isolated patellofemoral surgeries like lateral release, debridement arthroscopy combined with open fistectomies.
More
We've been
Clement.
having very good early results. So I
Absolutely,
think when
yeah.
you're doing STO, you have to probably address your patellofemoral status. You may want to correct some of the problems, especially the lateral sided pain using lateral release or lateral retinacular lengthening, or even a partial lateral fistectomy if you find a lateral patellar facet spur. So this has been our experience of late recently.
Clement, I agree with you fully. That's why I said the disease is a little different. Now, just because the patient has got knee OA on the X-ray doesn't mean it's symptomatic. Yeah, the patient has got only patellofemoral symptoms, lateral patellar pain. Probably arthroscopic surgery is very much justified, but that's a little different disease, and they don't need to address the knee OA. How many patients in the road we see who have got gross varus, no pain? X-ray probably shows tri-compartment OA. Doesn't mean a thing at all. So we're talking about symptomatic patients who have patellofemoral symptoms are a different bunch, and this is a different bunch. So both are little different diseases, and that is for a next roundtable discussion. And we're not talking about those patients now. In this AMOA type, progressing to tri-compartment OA, early OA, patellofemoral joint changes are secondary to this disease, and they, by and large, can be ignored. So when you find total lateral loss of cartilage, that is a primary patellofemoral disease. Medial changes, medial facet disease is secondary to OA changes. It can be, I think you have to make it out, of course. You don't want to treat a primary patellofemoral OA with a uni. That'd be a great mistake to do. But make it out for a different disease spectrum there. Would people concur on that?
Yeah, definitely. If it's a lateral patellofemoral joint, the lateral facet of the patella is involved, and that's not a good indication for a uni.
Yeah, so that's a little different disease. Now, for whatever reason, we don't get frank primary patellofemoral OA like the Western population, which needs a patellofemoral replacement. We don't find the disease here in India that much. So we leave it for another day discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is another interesting patient. He came to me following a PFO. Parag, can you see that?
Yes.
The problem with him was 1 year after the PFO, and the pain is really not gone away.
Yeah, so the proximal fibular osteotomy, that's the long form of PFO for the benefit of the viewers. Yeah.
Yes, that's a PFO is a proximal fibular. It's no more proximal, it's much more distal these days. So who does PFO here?
Not me. Sachin?
No way. I've only revised them.
Same here.
So what's the message?
So, no. How are you going to treat this patient?
Can we get some better X-rays?
Yeah. Do you have any closer X-rays?
So firstly, just quickly get the question out of the way of whether a PFO is a good option or is it definitely a bad option and we should avoid doing it.
Now, I will come to that in a second, Parag. Can somebody say how they're going to treat this problem? We've got an AMOA for which a PFO has been done. I'm sorry, I don't have the other X-rays. I tried to search it, I couldn't find it yet. So what do you do for him? Anyway, we are cutting out of time. Uni on him. So those are the pre-op pictures.
Okay.
And there's the post-op pictures.
Okay.
And guess what? The pain didn't go away.
Oh.
Sorry?
I can see significant patellofemoral OA there.
Well, I don't have the X-rays, but I don't think it is patellofemoral OA. Dhanshekar Raja from Ganga Hospital, he told me that when he does a TKR on post PFOs, the bone on the lateral side is very soft for a TKR. So it's not as innocuous as it looks. It's got its complications. So you can't say that it has got no complications. I think uni is contraindicated.
Yeah.
A TKR may not be that easy. So it's a note to beware.
The uni is contraindicated because the lateral compartment is soft, is it? Does it become softer?
We still don't know. We need more evidence on this.
Okay.
I think all of us who have operated on post-PFO patients must pull our data to find what's happening. But even the few TKRs that I did, the bone looked very soft. So it's not as innocuous as it looks. So you need to need more data on that. So you cannot say Yeah.
Vijay, it's a very Chennai surgery, this PFO.
Not really, not really,
No,
Sharan.
Bangalore, at least there are not many people in this part of the Bangalore. There are not many people doing this.
Sharan is becoming very famous everywhere. So many people have started doing proximal pingulostomy now.
There is an alternative universe about the
Yeah.
plates.
Now, Vijay's friend Prakash does a lot of that, and he's been popularizing this a lot. So I'm saying that.
Yeah. So I don't want to say it has got no. I don't have experience to say it doesn't work or anything. But all I know out of my experience is that it not as innocuous it looks. It's not like saying I do it. If it works, it works. Doesn't work, it doesn't work. No, it does not that. I think it does play a large part in your successful surgeries. Yeah. So that's the point I want to make. Yeah. So let us we're coming to a last point. Symptomatic tricompartmental bone-on-bone disease. There's only one answer. Is it no role for exercise therapy, no role for injections, no role for a uni, no role for a HTO, no role for stem cell, no role for a PFO. There's role only for a TKR. I think we all accept that. But I want to make this message very clear that especially for stem cell therapy, a lot of people are doing it for this advanced disease. It just doesn't work. Now, this is I'd like to end by this slide. This patient, you can see that has had a proximal fibular osteotomy done from the left side. I can excuse the surgeon if he did for tricompartmental OA, but it's done for inflammatory arthritis. So this is really, what shall I say?
Not a good idea.
Not acceptable in any yardstick.
Yeah, Vijay, can I ask you one question?
Yes, please.
Your uni seem to be doing fantastic. Can I just ask you one question? How long does it last compared to TKR? Just give it the one answer. Not how well your patient is. How long does it last?
Not the same time.
Don't agree. That's not what the data says. Maybe in your hands. It's just like your avian. Just like your avian in. I think you got to be a bit careful. Throwing uni in every damn thing. And I think you have to look at the parallel joint too. So I think there is. You got to be a bit moderate. You just can't just push uni in every AMOA alone.
No, we are certainly not pushing, Jacob. We're certainly not pushing. I think the indications are getting more and more very clear. When it works, when it doesn't work, how to do it, technique-wise, everything. People like Sachin have got, as he said, 17-20-year results. So we're not pushing in every patient, but we now.
But longevity isn't a problem. Longevity isn't a problem compared to.
Quickly on that point,
Yeah.
There are many variables,
Jacob. One big point.
Yeah, Sharan.
Sharan, you're not audible.
The main difference, we keep talking about this. HTO, I'm not audible. HTO, when we do, we know that it progresses over a period of time. Is that right? But AMO and unis are considered a solution, not a stopgap. That's what the Oxford people say. How many people agree and disagree with that? Yeah.
I agree strongly on that.
So there is enough evidence to prove that the revision of HTO to TKR, the results are much better than revising a uni to a TKR. There is enough evidence in literature on that.
Controversial, I would think. That statement is controversial.
No, I don't think I can prove it. There's enough in literature. I've researched on it, and the conclusion is that the revision of a HTO to a TKR, if you do a medial open wedge osteotomy, the results are much better than revising a uni.
I think it suffice to say that how an HTO has been done before, what implant has been used. Definitely, what a uni does is uni takes off more bone. So already you're cutting bone. In an HTO, the bone is preserved. So that's one of the disadvantages, converting an uni.
There are many confounding variables here. Can I come in? Yeah. So
what we can do is we can come again another day and talk only about unis and.
I think we should do that. Yeah.
That'll be another 3-hour session, sir.
Yeah, that's a good note to end the session, I think. Parag, you can have the last concluding remarks.
Yeah, so there are a couple of quick questions which have come. So regarding unis, Vijay, the question is, what do you prefer, a fixed bearing or do you prefer a mobile bearing uni?
I used to use mobile bearing, it worked well, but we are now moved on to a fixed bearing where I think the indications are even more than a mobile bearing.
Okay.
Why did you move?
Well, to be honest, one of the reasons was the robotic that we got seemed to do only the fixed bearing. So for various reasons, we had to, some of them are totally not scientific. We had to move on to fixed bearing, but that seems to work very well as well.
So another question is, one of the earlier slides which you showed, we always see this chondromalacia. So what is the treatment for chondromalacia? You know, the medical management for chondromalacia. What medicines work in chondromalacia?
Well, I think the injections and things are the same as the knee OA, but the exercise program is completely different. We do exercises for knee OA would aggravate patellofemoral OA, I would think, and the arthroscopic exercises are more amenable, as Clement was saying, than knee OA, more role in patellofemoral OA, I would think. Yeah. Yes, Vikash.
Yeah, I think for patellofemoral OA, the primary treatment initially would be the ITB and the lateral compartment physiotherapy.
Use your mic. Use the mic, please.
I don't know what's happening today. I think there's something wrong.
Less alcohol inside you.
No, it's you've taken away all of them. So, can you hear me now?
Now very well.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, first of all, of course, it would be non-invasive ITB stretches, and as you said, a different set of exercises. And if it does not work, then I would again try to do a non-invasive investigation like special X-ray views, skylines, and if needed, an MRI also to quantify the problem in patellofemoral joint, and then accordingly intervene if it is required arthroscopically.
Sachin, you want to tell how you manage early patellofemoral OA?
So I think that is another 3-hour session in itself. Predominantly, the pathoetiology of chondromalacia patelli is biomechanical as well as neural. So I think, Parag, let's have anterior knee pain as a different webinar so that we can have more highlights on that, and perhaps we can follow physical therapist also. So
Agreed.
let's keep that aside, if you don't mind.
One quick last question before we end. The question is that concomitant osteoporosis, osteomalacia with osteoarthritis, what's the line of treatment? That's one question which has come up. Anybody?
Just like metabolic issues, they have to be quantified and they have to be treated. They don't have a direct bearing on what all we discussed, but those have to be identified. Coexistent diseases with regard to bone metabolism have to be treated. Yeah, they cannot be
concomitantly you can treat, because a patient who is osteoarthritic can have osteomalacia or osteoporosis. So you need
absolutely
treat them concomitantly and simultaneously.
And some of them, the knee pain may go away. Yeah. So you don't jump and do any operative intervention. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think there are more questions, but we've run out of time. I want to thank Vijay for an excellent presentation. You brought about so many points. It's like 1 hour, 35 minutes we've been at it, but really enjoyed every moment of it. Well done, Vijay. I want to
thanks, Parag.
Thanks all the panelists who are here: Mukesh, Clement, Bhushan, Kanchan, Raju, Jacob, Vikas, Adarsh, Ashish, Alankar. Really great. You guys have done really wonderful. All this is not possible without Ashok, without Sachin's help. So, Ashok, we've really done very well, and to, bring out this kind of activity in the days where we are forced to be at home is enjoyable. And thanks, Ashok.
And some people in Goa.
It's right there behind. What's happening? You're in different part of the world.
Hawaii.